The water hit Nadia cold before she even made the decision to jump. 1 second she was standing on the muddy bank of the Okavango River with her boots already soaked through, and a small pouch of dried bark in her left hand that she had spent 40 minutes tracking through the brush. The next second her legs were moving, and her body followed, and the cold brown water swallowed her whole. She had heard the cry first. That was what did it. Not a loud sound, not something that would stop most people in their tracks, but a thin, reedy, desperate cry that landed somewhere behind her sternum and would not let go. It was the kind of sound that said, "This is the last try." It was the kind of sound that only came from something very small that was running out of time. She surfaced and shook the water from her eyes and looked. A wolf pup, 4 months old, maybe less, gray and white and absolutely tiny against the force of the current, its small legs cycling through water that did not care how hard it tried. It was turning in slow circles the way frightened animals do when they cannot find solid ground, when the body is working but the mind has already begun to give up. Nadia did not think about crocodiles. She thought about them later, back on dry land, and her hands shook so badly she had to sit down on the ground. But in the river, in that moment, there was only the pup and the current and the narrowing window of time. She swam toward it with everything she had. The Okavango is not a forgiving river. It pulls left when you expect it to pull right, and it is deeper in the middle than any first-time swimmer expects. And Nadia had grown up in London, had learned to swim in a chlorinated pool, and had been stationed at the reserve for only 8 months. She was a competent swimmer. She was not a river swimmer. There is a difference. The current took her sideways and she overcorrected and went under and came back up spitting water and had to relocate the pup, which had drifted another 3 meters downstream. She went after it. When she finally reached it, the pup snapped at her out of pure fear. Its small teeth grazed her forearm and she did not pull back. She cupped her palm under its belly and pulled it to her chest and turned for the bank, and that was when she understood how much water was between her and dry land. It felt like swimming through cold concrete. She kicked and pulled, and the pup stopped struggling once it understood that she was not going to drop it. It pressed itself flat against her chest and dug its claws into her shirt for purchase, and she took that as encouragement and kept going. Her left arm was burning. Her right arm, the one holding the pup, was doing something that felt more like dragging than swimming. The bank looked very far away, and then slightly less far, and then she felt mud under her feet, and she stood up in water up to her knees, and walked the last few steps and collapsed. She lay on the bank, on her back, with the pup on top of her, and breathed. The sky above the Okavango in early morning is a very particular shade of blue. It is the kind of blue that makes you aware of how large the sky is and how small you are beneath it. Nadia lay there for exactly as long as it took her lungs to stop screaming, and then she sat up and looked at the pup in her lap and took stock. Breathing, wet, terrified, alive. She ran her hands along its small body looking for injury the way she had been trained to do, quickly and methodically, pressing gently at the ribs and joints, checking the gums for color, looking at the eyes. The pup allowed this with the dazed compliance of something that has used up all of its resistance. She found a small cut above its right ear, probably from a submerged branch. Nothing worse. She pulled the pup closer and felt it shiver. It was a cold morning. She was soaked. The pup was soaked. She needed to get them both warm, and she needed to get the pup to someone who knew what to do next. Because Nadia was a wildlife medic, not a wolf specialist, and the longer she looked at this animal, the more she understood that it did not belong to the wild. Its paws were too clean. Its coat, even wet, had been groomed. Someone had been caring for this pup. She looked up and down the bank. That was when she saw him. He was standing about 30 meters away, perfectly still, watching her. 2 other people stood behind him, but she barely registered them. What she registered was the way he was standing, with the kind of controlled stillness that people learn when they have spent a long time being responsible for things that could go wrong. His boots were at the water's edge. He was already wet from the knee down. He had been in the river, she realized, and had either just come out or had stopped when he saw her go in. He was looking at the pup. Then he looked at her. She could not read his expression from that distance. She looked down and noticed for the first time that her calf was bleeding, that a rock somewhere in the river had opened a gash maybe 4 centimeters long, that was currently dripping quietly into the mud. She had felt nothing. She would feel it later. She looked back up and the man was walking toward her. He moved the way people moved when they were used to moving through rough terrain. Not hurrying, but also not wasting anything. His stride even, and deliberate. When he reached her, he crouched down and looked at the pup, and something in his face shifted in a way she could not name. His name was Kale Drovst. She did not know that yet. She did not know anything yet. She only knew that he was looking at the pup the way people look at things they have been searching for. He said, very quietly, "Come with us." Nadia Cole, who had never in her adult life followed anyone anywhere she had not specifically agreed to go, said yes before she had time to think about why. She was 27 years old. She had been in Botswana for 8 months. She had arrived with a 2-year contract, a single large duffel bag, and the particular kind of determination that young people carry when they are running less towards something than away from it. She did not like to examine this too closely. She was good at her work. She got up every morning. She was fine. The reserve where she was stationed, the Chobe Wildlife Reserve, was large and well-funded, and staffed by people who cared deeply about the animals in their care. Nadia liked the work. She liked the early mornings and the quietness of the bush and the way a problem at work was always concrete. A wound was a wound. Medicine worked or it did not. You knew where you stood. She did not always know where she stood with people. Her supervisor, a cheerful Zimbabwean man named George Ndlovu, had told her on her first day that the reserve shared its eastern border with a private conservation property. He had not said much more about it, except that the property was well run and that its owner was a serious man. Nadia had filed this information away and not thought much about it. She thought about it now, walking behind Kale Drovest and his 2 staff members toward a line of trees where 2 vehicles were parked on a dirt track, the pup wrapped in a dry jacket that one of the staff had produced from somewhere. The jacket was too large and the pup was swimming in it, but it had stopped shivering. She was the one still shivering. One of the staff members, a young man with a quiet manner who introduced himself as Samuel, handed her a bottle of water and a small towel, and looked at her calf with the careful attention of someone who had done basic first aid many times and knew that 4-centimeter gashes needed more than a towel, but could wait long enough to get to somewhere clean. "We'll sort that properly when we get back," he said. "How far is back?" Nadia asked. 20 minutes. She looked at the vehicles. She looked at the man loading the pup into the back seat of the first vehicle, with a carefulness that was almost painful to watch. She had her own vehicle parked further up the bank. She had a full day of work ahead of her. She had a schedule. She got into the vehicle. 20 minutes in the African bush is not 20 minutes on a road. It is 20 minutes of corrugated dirt track, dust, and the particular bone-shaking vibration of a suspension system that has given everything it had to give, and then some. Nadia held the door handle and watched the landscape pass. Kale Drovest sat in the front and said nothing. The pup, now wrapped in the jacket and wedged between Nadia and the door, had fallen into the deep, twitching sleep of animals who have just survived something. She watched the pup sleep and tried to sort out what had just happened. She was a logical person. She had studied for 4 years and worked for 3 more, and prided herself on her ability to assess a situation clearly and make the right call. She had made a call this morning. She was fairly certain it had been the right one, and she was now in a vehicle heading toward a property she had never visited, with a man who had spoken exactly 2 words to her. She decided that was fine. The compound appeared at the end of a long track flanked by fever trees, and when the vehicle came through the gate, Nadia sat up straighter. It was not what she expected, though she had not known what to expect. It was large, certainly, a main house of pale stone and weathered wood, several outbuildings, an equipment yard that was clean and well organized. What struck her first was the quiet. Not silence, because the bush is never silent, but a particular kind of purposeful quiet. People were working. No one was rushing. A woman came out of one of the outbuildings as they pulled in. Small, dark-haired, dressed in worn khaki, wiping her hands on a cloth. She saw the vehicle. Then she saw Kale carrying the pup and she moved faster. "Theo," the woman said. Not a question. A breath. Kale handed her the pup and she took it with the ease of long practice and began her own rapid assessment, hands moving quickly and surely over the small body. "Where did you find him?" "She found him." Kale said this without looking at Nadia. "In the river." The woman looked at Nadia for the first time. She had very direct eyes, and the kind of expression that was not unfriendly, but was also not wasting any time. "I am Priya," she said. "I am the vet here. Thank you for what you did." She said it plainly, without effusion, which Nadia appreciated more than she would have appreciated a warmer version of the same sentence. "Nadia Cole," Nadia said. "I am a wildlife medic at Chobe." "Come inside," Priya said. "You are bleeding, and you need dry clothes, and we need to get this animal sorted." Nadia followed her. The inside of the main house was practical and calm. A large kitchen, bookshelves, a mudroom stacked with equipment, photographs on one wall, not decorative, but the kind that people take because they want to remember something. A wolf with her pups, a conservation team standing in front of a newly repaired section of fence, a survey map annotated in careful handwriting. Priya took the pup to a room set up as a medical space, which Nadia recognized immediately. She had one very similar at the reserve. Clean surfaces, good light, organized equipment. The difference was that this one was set up for larger animals, and set up well. Nadia sat on a chair just inside the door while Priya examined the pup with quiet efficiency. Samuel appeared with a first aid kit and crouched by Nadia's leg without ceremony, and began cleaning the gash on her calf. She let him work. She watched the vet. "He is cold," Priya said. "Dehydrated. Minor laceration above the ear, otherwise intact." She looked up. "You got him out fast." "I heard him crying," Nadia said. "The current was moving." Priya looked at her for a moment. "Yes, it was." She returned to the pup. Cale Drost appeared in the doorway and stayed there. He did not come in. He leaned against the frame and watched Priya work, and the expression on his face was the one Nadia had seen on the bank, the one she had not been able to name. She looked at him more carefully now that she had the chance. He was tall, broad across the shoulders, 40 maybe, or near it. His face was weathered in the way of people who spend most of their time outside, not beaten, just marked, as though the sun and wind had taken note of him over many years and left their record. He had dark eyes and a jaw that was set in a way that might have been stubbornness or might have been habit. She could not tell yet. What she could tell was that he had not stopped watching the pup since the moment he had taken it from the river. She looked away. Samuel finished with her leg, and the wound was clean and dressed, and she could finally feel it. A steady, specific ache that would be worse tomorrow. "Thank you," she told him. He nodded, and packed up the kit and left, and Nadia was alone with the vet, and Cale in the doorway, and the pup now wrapped in warm towels and hooked to a small heated pad that was doing its steady work. "He should sleep," Priya said. 2 or 3 hours after that, we will see what he will eat." "Has he been missing long?" Nadia asked. There was a short pause. Not long, but she noticed it. 8 days, Cale said, from the doorway, still not entering the room. Nadia looked at him. 8 days was a long time for a pup this young to be alone in the wild. It was a long time for anyone to be looking. She did not ask what had happened. The way he said it, and the way Priya had looked at the floor when he said it, told her enough for now. She stood up and tested her weight on the injured leg. It held. "I should go back," she said. "I have work, and my vehicle is on the bank." Priya looked at Cale. Cale looked at Nadia. "Samuel will take you back to your vehicle," he said. "Have a meal first." It was not a request, exactly. It was not a demand. It was the statement of a man who expected things to be reasonable, and considered a hot meal after a cold river to be a reasonable expectation. Nadia was hungry. She had skipped breakfast to start her morning circuit early. She sat down at the kitchen table and ate scrambled eggs and strong tea, and watched through the window as 2 of the property's staff moved about the yard in the measured way of people with long lists and short daylight. A radio crackled somewhere. Someone laughed at something out of her line of sight. The morning light was moving the shadows around, and the yard smelled of dust and grass, and the particular mineral sharpness of water that had already been in the sun for a few hours. She finished her tea. Cale sat across from her with his own cup and did not say much. He asked how long she had been at Chobe. She told him. He asked whether she had done river work before this posting. She said no, London trained, mostly domestic and zoo animals before the contract here, learning fast. He nodded at that and looked out the window. She should have felt more out of place. She did not. The kitchen had the quality of a room that had absorbed a great deal of work over a long time, and had become comfortable with it. When Samuel came to tell her the vehicle was ready, she got up and thanked Priya, who was passing through with a stack of charts and did not slow down but said, "Good work this morning," over her shoulder in a way that Nadia understood was meaningful coming from her. She followed Samuel to the vehicle. She did not expect Cale to come outside, but when she reached the vehicle and looked back at the main house, he was standing in the doorway, one shoulder against the frame, watching her go the same way he had watched the pup in the water. As if something had just landed in a place where he had not expected it to land, and he was still working out what to do about that. Samuel drove her back to the bank. Her vehicle was where she had left it, the pouch of dried bark still on the passenger seat, slightly crushed where she had dropped it when she jumped. She picked it up and looked at it. 40 minutes of tracking for something she had completely forgotten about for the last 2 hours. She drove back to the reserve. She did her rounds. She wrote her notes. She called George Endlovu and reported the river incident because it was the kind of thing that needed to go in the log. And he listened and said, "You jumped in after a wolf pup, not quite a question." And she said yes, and he said all right then. which was about as effusive as George got, and she understood that he meant she had done well. She did not mention Cale Drovest by name. She said the pup had been recovered by its owners. George said that was good. They moved on to the day's other business. That evening, Nadia sat outside her small house at the edge of the reserve staff quarters and watched the sky do what the sky does in Botswana at dusk, which is to catch fire very slowly and very completely in shades of orange and red that no photograph has ever captured correctly. She held a cup of tea that had gone cold and thought about a wolf pup sleeping on a heated pad in a room that smelled of antiseptic and clean straw. She thought about 8 days. She thought about the way Cale Drovest had said it, flat and precise, the way you say a number when you have been counting every hour of it. She went inside and slept hard and woke at 4:30 as she always did, and dressed, and went to work. 3 days later, Samuel appeared at the Chobe Reserve Gate in the mid-afternoon with a message from Dr. Rao. The message was short. It said that Theo, the pup, was refusing to eat. It said that he had been refusing since the previous evening, and that Priya had tried 3 different approaches, and the pup was not in medical danger yet, but was being extremely difficult, and that Priya thought Nadia might want to come and see. Nadia read the message. She asked Georgiana Lovu if she could take 2 hours in the afternoon for a call at the neighboring property. George looked at her. He said, "Is this about the pup you rescued?" She said yes. He looked at his schedule board, and then at her and said, "Take the afternoon." She drove to the compound with Samuel, who had waited at the gate, and found Priya in the animal area, with an expression that sat somewhere between scientific frustration and outright exasperation. "He eats for no one," Priya said, pointing at the pen where Theo was sitting in the far corner, small and stubborn and determinedly ignoring the food bowl in front of him. Nadia looked at Theo. Theo looked at Nadia. Then Theo got up and walked to the gate of his pen, and pushed his nose through the wire, and made the sound that had stopped her on the bank 3 days ago. The thin, reedy sound, the last try sound, but this time it was directed at her. Nadia was quiet for a moment. Then she opened the gate, sat down on the floor of the pen, and held out her hand. Theo walked to her and put his head in her palm. Then he sat down against her leg and ate every scrap in the bowl without taking his eyes off her face. Priya stood in the doorway of the pen and watched this with an expression that was not surprise. Exactly. More like confirmation of a hypothesis she had already formed. Nadia looked up and found Cale standing behind Priya. He was looking at Theo the way he always looked at the pup, with that particular quality of attention that was too careful to be casual. Then he looked at Nadia. He said nothing. She looked back at Theo, who had finished eating, and was now determinedly trying to climb into her lap, which, given his size and the awkwardness of the pen floor, was more effort than it looked. She thought, "I will have to come back tomorrow." She did not think about what came after that. She let the pup climb into her lap and held him steady and listened to the sounds of the compound settling into early evening and did not think very far ahead at all. The second morning she arrived earlier than the first. Samuel had offered to come and collect her, but she had said she would find her own way, which turned out to be more complicated than she expected, because the track from the main road to Cale Drovest's property was not marked on any map she had access to, and she missed the turn twice before finding a weathered wooden post, half hidden in a thicket of mopane, that might once have had a sign on it, and no longer did. As she pulled in through the gate at 7:15 and the compound was already moving, she could hear it before she saw it, the low murmur of a two-way radio from somewhere in the outbuildings, the sound of a generator running, the particular percussion of a gate being latched and relatched while someone's hands were full. Priya was in the medical room with Theo when Nadia arrived. The pup was standing on the examination table, looking extremely displeased about the thermometer and the indignity of the whole process. 38.4, Priya said without looking up. Normal, he is perfectly healthy. She removed the thermometer. Except that he will eat nothing unless you are here. I was going to try something, Nadia said. What can I feed him this morning? Priya gestured at the food bowl. Please. Nadia took the bowl and sat on the floor of the pen, the same position as the evening before. Theo came immediately, ate everything, settled against her knee with the proprietary ease of an animal that has made a decision about where it belongs. Priya watched from the doorway. This is called imprinting, Priya said. In the strict behavioral sense, it is not quite the right word, because he was past the critical imprinting window when this happened. But the effect is similar. He bonded to you during a high-stress event. You were the safe thing. Now you are the safe thing when he is anxious. And eating makes him anxious? Nadia asked. Eating alone makes him anxious. Eating means being vulnerable, on the ground, head down, not watching. A pup this age in the wild would eat only within the safety of the pack. Priya paused. You are his pack. Nadia looked down at Theo, who had finished eating and was now gnawing thoughtfully on the hem of her trousers. How long does this last? She asked. For a domestic imprint situation. Weeks. Sometimes longer. It depends on how we manage the transition. Priya picked up her chart. Ideally, we introduce him gradually to the adult wolves here, and they become his reference point rather than you. But that takes time and careful work, and in the meantime he needs to eat. So I need to come here to feed him. Twice a day, Priya said. At minimum, morning and evening. Nadia did the mental arithmetic of her schedule, and the drive time, and the missed turn in the Mopane. She said nothing for a moment. I can adjust my rounds, she said. I will speak to George Nelavu, Priya said. We have a formal arrangement with Chobi for shared animal welfare situations. This qualifies. Nadia looked at her. You know George? We have worked together twice before, Priya said. He is a practical man. She made a note on her chart. Come at 6 in the morning and 6 in the evening. Samuel will make sure the gate is open. Nadia nodded. She stayed for another hour that first morning, partly because Theo refused to settle once she stood up, and partly because Priya pulled her into a tour of the facilities that was clearly disguised as orientation but was actually, Nadia suspected, an assessment. Priya walked her through the wolf enclosures, the rehabilitation pens, the medical room, the feed preparation area, and talked about each wolf with the specific knowledge of someone who had spent years learning exactly one animal and had found that animal infinitely worth learning. There were 6 adult wolves in the pack. Priya named them as they passed each enclosure. Ada, the dominant female, gray and large and watching Nadia from the far end of her space with an expression of dignified skepticism. The River, a young male, only 2 years old, who paced his enclosure with nervous energy that Priya said was improving. Old Sadie, who was 9 years old, and moved slowly, and was the wolf that Priya watched most carefully at feeding time. And Theo's mother? Nadia asked. It came out before she thought about whether to ask. Priya stopped walking. She was quiet for a moment. Luna, she said. She was Ada's daughter, 2 years old. Very young for a mother, but she had taken to it well. A pause. She went into the river chasing something we think a young impala. The current. Priya did not finish the sentence. She did not need to. Nadia thought about the river, the pull of it, the way it had taken her sideways even though she had been trying. When? She asked. 8 days before you found Theo. Nadia was quiet. Kakail was in the field when it happened, Priya said. He came back and Luna was gone and Theo was unaccounted for. He looked every day. She said this simply, as a fact, not a plea for sympathy. Every day for 8 days. Nadia thought about Kale saying that number in the doorway of the medical room, flat and precise. 8 days. She thought about counting hours. She thought about what it did to a person to count hours, when the thing they were looking for was very small, and the bush was very large. She did not say any of this out loud. She helped Priya with the afternoon preparations instead, because her hands were already there and the work needed doing, and she was not someone who stood in a room while work was being done, if she could be useful. Priya let her help without making it an occasion. That was when Nadia understood that she was going to like Priya Rao. Kale Drovst she did not see until the late afternoon. She was in the feed room chopping the protein component of the adult wolves' evening meal, which was work she had not offered to do but had been handed without ceremony by a staff member named Leon who had disappeared immediately after handing over the knife, clearly grateful for the relief. She was halfway through the task when she heard boots on the wooden step outside and Kale came in. He looked at what she was doing. He said, Leon found someone to replace him. It was, she would realize later, as close to a joke as Kale drove Scott. His expression did not change, but there was something around the edges of it. I was free, she said. Does it need to go smaller? He looked at what she had cut and said, no, that is correct. Then he went to the other side of the prep table and began working on the supplement preparation without asking her to move or make space. They worked side by side in the feed room for about 20 minutes, in a quiet that was comfortable, in the way that unexpected things sometimes are. He told her that Ada had been eating less than usual. She told him that in her experience, dominant females sometimes ate less when there was a change to the group dynamic. He nodded at this. He said Priya had said the same. She asked him how long the property had been running as a conservation project. 11 years, he said. Before that it was a cattle farm. My family sold the cattle. He paused. It was a long argument. Nadia looked at him. Did you win? Eventually, he said. She went back to the chopping. There was something she wanted to ask, and she took her time about it. She had learned early in the work that there were questions you asked directly and questions you came to sideways, and that knowing the difference was half of doing anything well. "The track from the main road," she said. "The turn is very easy to miss." He looked up. "The post with no sign," she said. "Is there a reason it has no sign?" "Yes," he said. He did not elaborate. She thought about that for a moment. A man who had spent 11 years turning a cattle farm into a wolf conservation project in a country that was not his birth country, who had pulled his family into a long argument and won it, whose workers moved with the particular loyalty of people who had been trusted over time, who had not slept properly for 8 days while he looked for something very small in a very large bush. A man who had a gate with an empty post and a track that was easy to miss and wanted it that way. She finished the chopping and put the knife down. "I will learn the turn," she said. He looked at her. "Yes," he said, "you will." She drove back to Chobe in the early evening with the windows down and the dust coming in, and Theo's small weight still somehow present against her leg, even though she had left him an hour ago, settled and sleeping. She thought about Luna, who had been young, and whose daughter Theo was. She thought about the river. She thought about 8 days. She did not think about Cale Drovst's face when she said she would learn the turn. She thought about it later, when she had stopped thinking about other things. She was due back at 6 in the morning. She set her alarm and went to sleep. She knew the turn by the 4th morning. It helped that Samuel had described it to her on day 2 in terms that were genuinely useful. The mopane tree with the split trunk, left when you see it, you will think you are too early, you are not. And Nadia had filed this information with the careful precision that she applied to all practical information, and had made the turn correctly on the 3rd day, and correctly again on the 4th. Theo knew the sound of her vehicle. This was Priya's observation, offered on day 5 with the same flat scientific precision with which Priya offered all observations. "He begins to move toward the gate approximately 30 seconds before you come through the main compound gate," she said. "I have been timing it." Nadia looked at Priya. "I find it interesting," Priya said, and went back to her chart. The routine established itself with the quiet solidity of things that become true by repetition. Nadia arrived at 6 in the morning. She fed Theo. She helped with whatever morning work was happening, and there was always morning work happening at a property like this: an equipment check, a health observation round on the adult wolves, a fence inspection of the western enclosure, which was the oldest section and required regular attention. She had not been asked to help with any of these things. She had begun helping because the work was there and she was there, and it felt wrong to sit and watch while people around her were busy. No one told her to stop. On day 6, Leon appeared beside her during the fence inspection and handed her a pair of gloves without comment, which she understood was his version of a formal welcome. In the evenings she returned at 6 and fed Theo again, and often stayed until 8 or 9 because Theo was difficult at night, restless and inclined to howl in a way that was small and heartbreaking, and that the adult wolves in the nearby enclosure answered in a way that was not yet comfort, but was at least acknowledgement. Priya had begun the introduction process. Short, structured sessions where Theo was brought near the adult enclosure and could hear and smell the pack without direct contact. Ada, who was large and dignified and patient in the way of animals that know their own authority, had begun to approach the fence during these sessions and stand near it, not displaying, not aggressive, simply present. Priya watched these sessions with the focused attention of someone reading a language she had spent years learning. "Ada is deciding," Priya told Nadia one evening. "Deciding what?" Nadia asked. "Whether he is pack," Priya said. "She is the one who decides, not me, not Cale. Her." Nadia watched Ada through the fence. The wolf looked back. Steady gold eyes, large gray body, absolute economy of movement. "How long does she take to decide?" Nadia asked. "As long as she takes," Priya said. Nadia had dinner at the compound on day 7. It was not planned. She had stayed late because Theo was having a difficult evening, and by the time the pup had settled it was past 8, and the kitchen was already full of the smell of whatever meal had been prepared, and Samuel simply appeared in the doorway of the wolf area and said, "There is food if you want it," and went back inside. The kitchen table seated 8. There were 5 of them that evening: Nadia, Priya, Samuel, Leon, and a 4th staff member named Grace, who managed the property logistics and had a quick, dry humor that surfaced in small, precise remarks that were easy to miss if you were not paying attention. Cale sat at the head of the table in the way of a man who sat at the head of that table every night. He listened more than he spoke, but he was not absent. He asked Grace about the supply delivery, and asked Leon about the fence section they had repaired that day, and asked Priya whether Ada had eaten well. He asked Nadia whether the drive from Chobe was manageable. "Yes," she said. "I know the turn now." He picked up his glass. "Good." Grace, who was sitting across from Nadia, caught Nadia's eye with an expression that was entirely too brief and too neutral to be accidental. Nadia looked at her plate. The conversation moved on. After dinner, Nadia helped clear the table, because that was what she did when she ate at someone else's table. And then she stood in the kitchen for a moment and realized that it was 9:30 in the evening, and the compound had a particular settled quality that meant that this was what it always felt like at 9:30, and she had only been here 8 days, but she already recognized it. She said goodnight and drove back to Chobe. On day 8, the routine broke. She arrived at 6 in the morning to find the compound unusually quiet, a different quiet than usual, one that had the quality of people who had been up for a while and were tired. Priya met her at the gate before she had reached the main area. "Ada is unwell," Priya said. "She has been unwell since the night. I have been with her since 3. Nadia did not ask the obvious questions. She asked the useful one, "What do you need?" Priya looked at her for a moment, then she said, "Come with me." Ada was in her enclosure, lying on her side, breathing steadily, but not getting up. Her eyes were open and she was alert, which was the good sign, but her belly was distended, and Priya had already run the initial assessment and had a strong working hypothesis and needed a second pair of competent hands. Nadia worked beside Priya for 2 hours. The diagnosis was a dietary issue, not uncommon in large animals managed in semi-captivity, manageable with prompt intervention, uncomfortable, but not immediately dangerous. They worked carefully and systematically, and Ada bore the process with the dignity of an animal that understood on some level that the discomfort was purposeful. Kale stood at the enclosure gate. He had been there since Nadia arrived. He did not come in. He watched Priya work, and he watched Nadia work, and when Priya asked for the second syringe, Kale passed it through the gate before Samuel could reach it. By 8 in the morning, Ada was on her feet, looking disgruntled but stable. She walked to the water trough and drank, and then turned her back on all of them, and went to the far corner of the enclosure in the manner of a wolf who had been fussed over enough. Priya exhaled. Nadia sat down on the ground outside the enclosure and let the adrenaline leave her body, which took a minute. Kale came and stood beside her. She looked up at him from the ground. The light was still low and the shadow of the enclosure fence was striped across the yard, and his face was tired in the way of a man who had not slept and had done his best to hide it and had mostly succeeded. "Thank you," he said. "Priya did the work," Nadia said. "You were here," he said. She did not answer that. He was quiet for a moment. Then he sat down on the ground beside her, which she had not expected. They sat in the dust outside Ada's enclosure, and the morning moved around them, and neither of them said anything for a few minutes. Theo appeared at the fence of his own enclosure 20 meters away, and began the sound that she had begun to think of as his particular complaint. Nadia got up to go and feed him. She was halfway across the yard when Kale spoke. "You're posting at Chobe," he said. "How long is the contract?" She turned. 18 months remaining, she said. He nodded. He was looking at Theo, who had increased the volume of his complaint considerably. "That is enough time," he said. She did not know what he meant. She thought about it later, driving back to Chobe in the sharp morning light, and she thought she might know, but she was not certain. She filed it away. She fed Theo. She gave Priya a thorough handover note on Ada's status before she left. She made sure the morning round logs were complete. She was professional and methodical, and she thought about nothing beyond the work in front of her. She thought about it later. She thought, enough time for what? She had no answer. She let the question sit. It sat there all the way back to Chobe, and then all the way through her afternoon rounds, and then through dinner, and then as she lay in bed listening to the night sounds of the bush, the far-off call of something, the click of insects, the dry warm air moving through the window. Enough time. She did not know what he had meant. She was not sure, for the first time in a long time, that she needed to. She was not supposed to be thinking about Kale Druvst on day 12. She was supposed to be thinking about the water buffalo in the east paddock of Chobe Reserve, who had developed a limp that George Nelavu wanted assessed before the afternoon, and she was thinking about that, mostly. She had the assessment checklist in her head, and she was thinking about the limp, and whether it was the left foreleg or the right foreleg, because George's report had not specified, and those were quite different problems. She was not thinking about the conversation she had overheard that morning. She had arrived at the compound at 6:10, which was later than usual, because she had stopped to recheck her notes from the previous evening's round and lost track of time. And she had been walking across the yard to the feed room when she heard two voices from the direction of the equipment shed, low and rapid, in a way that meant something was being worked out. She had not been trying to listen. She was walking past. She heard her own name. "Nadia has been here 12 days, one voice said. It was Grace. She knows the feed prep schedule. She knows the morning round. She knows Theo's feeding requirements better than Leon does at this point. A pause. Then Cale. "Yes. I am telling you," Grace said, "because she is going to leave when Theo is fully transitioned to the pack, and you will not have said anything and then she will go." Another pause. Longer. "She has a posting at Chobe," Cale said. 18 months, Grace said. "I heard you say it." Nadia had kept walking. She had gone to the feed room and begun the morning preparation, and fed Theo at 6:15, and then driven to Chobe. And now she was standing in the east paddock of the reserve, looking at a water buffalo's left foreleg, which was the left foreleg, and was a bruised hoof capsule, and would need soaking and monitoring, and probably a week of reduced movement. She wrote this in her notes. She thought about Grace's voice, the particular tone of it. "I am telling you because." She thought about Cale saying yes, in the way that meant he already knew. She walked back to the clinic and wrote her assessment for George and then sat at her desk and looked at the wall for approximately 3 minutes before picking up her pen and starting the afternoon's paperwork. She was good at this, continuing, at putting things in the part of her mind where they would wait quietly until she had time to look at them properly. She had developed this skill over several years and it served her well. She was not sure it was going to serve her on this particular subject. She went to the compound at 6 that evening. Theo ate well, more confidently than he had in the first days, making eye contact with her less often, and showing more interest in the sounds from Ada's enclosure. This was good. This was progress. Priya tracked it with the same attention she brought to everything. Nadia sat on the floor of Theo's pen for a while after the feeding, watching him investigate the corner of his enclosure with the focused purpose of a 4-month-old who has found something that might be interesting, and is determined to establish definitively whether it is. Cale came at 7:30. He did not come to the wolf area often in the evenings. He usually did the last property check from the equipment side, the generator, the water supply, the vehicle yard. Nadia had learned his evenings the way she had learned everything else about the compound, by paying attention. He came and stood at Theo's enclosure and looked at the pup. Nadia looked up. "Priya thinks 2 more weeks," she said, "before he is fully with Ada's group." "Yes," he said. She looked back at Theo. "And after that?" she said. It was a careful question. She had thought about how to ask it all day, and this was the version she had decided on. Not "you said enough time," and what did that mean? Not "Grace thinks you will let me leave without saying anything," just "and after that." Cale was quiet for a moment. He said, "That is what I have been thinking about." She waited. "We have no formal wildlife medic on staff," he said. "Priya covers what she can. For the larger medical events I call on George's team or bring someone in from Moen. It is not ideal." Nadia looked at Theo, who had moved on from the corner investigation, and was now looking at her with the expression that meant he was about to demand to be picked up. "You are saying you have a position," she said. "I am saying the work is here," he said. "Whether there is a position is a different question. The position would have to be created." She picked up Theo, who immediately climbed her shoulder and began investigating her hair with the level of focus he usually reserved for food. "That is a significant thing," she said. "Yes," Cale said. "It is." She thought about her contract at Chobe. She thought about George Nalovu, who was fair and practical, and who had said, "All right then," when she told him she had jumped into a river for a wolf pup, which was his version of approval. She thought about the room at the staff quarters and the drive every day, and the mopane tree with the split trunk. She thought about 12 days that had felt like longer, not in a bad way, in the way of time that is full. She thought about Luna. She thought about what it meant that Cale had looked every day for 8 days and had not found the pup, and then a stranger had jumped into a river and the pup was in her arms on the bank when he got there. She thought about enough time. "Let me think about it," she said. "Yes," he said. "Think about it." Theo had given up on her hair and fallen asleep on her shoulder with the immediacy of an animal that had made a decision and committed to it entirely. She stood there in the pen with a sleeping wolf pup on her shoulder, and the evening settling around the compound, and Cale standing at the fence and thought, "This is a very specific situation to be in." She thought about London. She thought about the chlorinated pool. She thought about what she had been moving toward, and what she had been moving away from when she took the contract at Chobe, and how those two things were not always as different as people like to believe. And she thought about a river that pulls sideways when you are not expecting it. She carefully transferred Theo to his sleeping area, and he rearranged himself without waking up. She looked at Cale. "I will let you know by Friday," she said. "All right," he said. She drove back to Chobe. She did not think about it on the drive back. She thought about the water buffalo and the assessment she had written, and whether the soaking schedule she had recommended was the right interval. She thought about it later. She thought about it for a long time. She was going to say yes. She understood this before Friday, before Thursday even, before she had spoken to George Nedolovu, or looked at the formal terms of anything. She understood it the way she had understood to jump into the river, not as a decision exactly, more as a recognition. The thing was already true. She just needed to say it out loud. The storm came without the usual warning. The Okavango has a particular relationship with weather that people who have not lived near it often underestimate. Storms here do not announce themselves the way storms do in cities. There is no gradual darkening over the course of an afternoon, no slow build of cloud, no reasonable time to bring in the chairs from the garden. The weather here moves like an animal. It is somewhere else. And then, it is on top of you. And what happens between those two states is very fast. Nadia had learned this in her first month at Chobe. She had been caught in a storm on a quad bike with nothing but a light jacket, and had arrived back at the reserve clinic soaked to the skin, and had sat under the towel dryer for 20 minutes, while George Nedolovu observed that the sky had been clear when she left, and said, without further elaboration, that she would learn. She had learned. She knew, on the afternoon of day 23, that the sky to the southwest had a particular quality that meant weather by evening. She mentioned it to Priya, who looked at the sky and said, "Yes, probably. Leon should check the eastern fence before dark." The eastern fence was the oldest section of the compound perimeter, and it was the section most likely to cause trouble under stress. It had been reinforced twice in the years she had been coming here, but it was still the weak point, and everyone knew it. Leon checked it at 4 in the afternoon and reported that it looked stable. Cale heard this and did not look entirely reassured, which was, Nadia had learned, how Cale looked when he thought something was about to become a problem. She stayed. She had not planned to stay. She had fed Theo and helped with the late afternoon checks, and she had her vehicle, and she should have been back at Chobe by 5 at the latest, but she looked at the sky, and then at the fence, and then at Cale, who was standing in the equipment yard talking to Samuel in the clipped, efficient way he used when he was running contingency plans. She went to the equipment shed and found a spare pair of heavy gloves and put them in her jacket pocket. And the rain started at 6:17. She had seen rain at the reserve. She had seen rain in London, which is a city with a comprehensive and long-standing relationship with rainfall. This was different. This was rain that had somewhere to be and was determined to get there. Rain that came in horizontally from the southwest and within 4 minutes had turned the compound yard into a surface that was halfway between mud and water. The first crack in the eastern fence was reported by Grace on the radio at 6:40. By the time Nadia and Cale reached the fence section, there was a 2-meter gap in the lower wire where a wooden post had given way in the softened ground, and the wire had snapped under the load of water collecting in the sagging section. It was not a catastrophic breach. It was not the kind of breach that let a wolf through in the next 5 minutes. It was the kind of breach that became the other kind if you left it for 2 hours in a storm. They did not leave it for 2 hours. What followed was 90 minutes of work that Nadia would think about later in the way you think about things that were genuinely hard. The ground was soft and the wire was heavy, and the replacement post had to be driven in properly or the repair would not hold. And driving a post into saturated ground in the middle of a storm with a hand maul while the wire kept pulling back and the rain kept coming is the kind of task that strips everything down to the work itself. She did not think about being cold. She was cold. She did not notice it. Cale worked beside her the entire time. He did not direct her. She did not need directing. She passed him the tensioner when he reached for it, and took the wire end when he handed it off, and when the post began to go sideways in the soft ground, she threw her weight against it from the other side, and held it while he hammered. Samuel came out with a light at 7:15, and held it steady without being asked. By 7:40 the fence was repaired. They checked the wire tension 3 times. Cale pushed on the post with both hands and it held. They stood in the rain for a moment and looked at the repair. Nadia became aware that she was extremely wet and that her hands, even inside the gloves, had gone numb from the cold and from the work. and that a very specific muscle in her right shoulder was making a complaint that was going to be louder in the morning. She pulled the gloves off and began coiling the spare wire. Cale reached past her for the other end. Their hands met in the middle of the coil. Neither of them moved. It was dark. The rain was still coming. There was wire between them and mud underfoot, and Samuel had gone back toward the lights of the compound, and they were at the fence in the dark, and neither of them moved. For a moment that was far too long to be accidental, and both of them knew it. Nadia pulled her hand back. She finished coiling the wire. Cale picked up the maul and the remaining post without speaking. They walked back to the compound in the rain. The lights of the kitchen were visible from the eastern fence, and they walked toward them, and the mud was thick, and the rain showed no intention of stopping. Grace met them at the door with towels. She looked at them both with an expression that was entirely too composed to be accidental, and said, "Ada is fine. I checked on her. Dinner is in 20 minutes," and went back to the kitchen. Nadia stood in the mudroom and dried her face and thought about hands in the dark, and a moment that had lasted too long. She did not look at Cale. She could feel him on the other side of the mudroom, drying his hands, removing his boots with the particular efficiency he brought to every physical task. She kept her eyes on the towel in her hands. She thought, that was a specific moment. She thought, I am going to have to decide what to do with that. She thought, not tonight. She put down the towel. She looked at the kitchen door. She went through it. Dinner was lamb stew that Grace had made that morning, and left to do what lamb stew does best. And it was exactly what was needed after 90 minutes of rain and heavy work. Nadia ate 2 bowls. Leon, who was across from her, did the same and then pushed his bowl away and sat back with the expression of a man who has done a physically demanding thing and is now considering what he has accomplished. "Good repair," he said to her. "Post is in solid," she said. "Should hold." "Should," he agreed, which meant it probably would. Kyle ate and said little. He asked about the wolf enclosures which Samuel reported on. He asked about the generator, which had held through the storm, which was a relief because the backup system needed work. He looked at Nadia once, across the table, and the look was not long but it was direct, and she held it for a moment before looking back at her stew. She drove home in the rain. The roads were not terrible, slow, and she took them carefully with the headlights cutting through the wet dark, and the wipers working hard. She thought about the fence, and she thought about the repair. She thought about hands in the dark. She had not let herself think about Cale Drovst in those terms. She had been careful about that. There were good reasons to be careful. She was a person on the compound under a specific professional arrangement. He was the man who ran the compound. She was thinking about taking a position there. These were reasons to be thoughtful. She was being thoughtful. She was also thinking about the moment at the fence, and she was going to keep thinking about it in the way that you keep thinking about a thing when you cannot quite put it down. She parked outside her small house at the reserve and sat in the vehicle for a moment. She thought about the choice she had not yet formally communicated. She had said Friday, it was Wednesday. She had 2 days, which suddenly seemed like a very specific amount of time. She went inside. She changed her wet clothes. She sat at the small table in her kitchen and wrote the rest of her daily notes, which she had not finished before the storm. She went to bed. She lay in the dark and thought about the repair and the rain and the particular quality of the moment at the fence, and at some point the thinking became quieter and she fell asleep. She woke at 4:30 as she always did. She got up and dressed and made coffee and went out to start her morning. The bush after rain had a smell that she was not sure she could describe to someone who had not been there. Clean and green and something under that, warm earth releasing days of stored heat, the particular freshness of water on red soil. She stood outside her house for a moment before getting in her vehicle and breathed it in. She thought, yes. Not to the moment at the fence, not yet, not in those terms, but yes to the compound, yes to the work, yes to the thing that was already true that she just needed to say out loud. Friday, she had said. She was going to call it Wednesday. She drove to the compound in the clean morning after the rain and made the turn at the mopane tree without hesitation and pulled in through the gate at 6:04. Priya was in the medical room. The adult wolves were calling to each other in the way they did after a weather event, establishing, checking in. Theo was at the gate of his pen making his complaint. She fed Theo. She checked on Ada, who was fine, who looked at Nadia through the fence with the same calm evaluation she had been offering since the first day. Cale came out of the main house at 6:40 with 2 cups of coffee. He handed her one. She took it. I am going to call George this morning, she said, and then I will need to see the formal terms of the arrangement you are proposing. He looked at her. I am saying yes, she said. I thought you should know before I talk to George. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Good. Not thank you. Not, I'm glad. Not any of the things people say in films. Just, good." In the specific tone of a man for whom something that had been uncertain has become settled. She drank her coffee. "The terms," she said. "Priya will have thoughts. She already has a list," he said. "She gave it to me 2 days ago." Nadia looked at him. 2 days ago. "She is thorough," he said. Nadia thought about Priya with a list 2 days ago, which meant the morning after Nadia had started thinking about yes but had not yet said it. She thought about Grace's voice in the equipment shed on day 12. "I am telling you because she will leave." She thought about a compound where everyone paid careful attention to things and nobody said the obvious thing directly. She thought, "I am going to fit in here. I want to look at the eastern fence section again," she said, "in daylight." "Yes," he said, "I was going to." They walked to the eastern fence in the morning light after the rain, with their coffee cups and the wet grass soaking their boots, and checked the repair in the way that careful people check repairs, methodically and without rushing, and the post was solid, and the wire tension was correct, and the work had held. She put her hand on the repaired post and pushed. It did not move. "Good," Cale said. She looked at him. He was looking at the fence, then he looked at her. The morning light was coming in low and gold, and it was the specific light of the Okavango after rain, which was a light that had no equivalent anywhere she had been before, and which she suspected she would spend a long time trying to explain to people who had not seen it. He said nothing. She looked back at the fence and finished her coffee. She had things to do. She had a call to make and a list to review and Theo to check on before she went back to Chobe for the last of her morning duties there. She walked back toward the compound. He walked beside her. It was not a decision. It was just how they were walking. It was Friday when she told George. Not because she had not been ready on Wednesday. She had been ready on Wednesday. She had picked up her phone twice and put it down twice, not from uncertainty, but from the particular inertia that comes with formally ending one thing and beginning another. There was paperwork involved, and official channels, and a reserve protocol for early contract amendments, and George would need time to arrange cover, and all of this was real, and all of this mattered. She called him on Friday morning before she left for the compound. George Nedlovu listened to what she said. He was quiet for a moment after she finished. "The wolf pup," he said. "Yes," she said. "You are telling me," he said, "that you jumped into the Okavango River 23 days ago, and now you are leaving my employ for the conservation property next door." "That is an accurate description," she said. Another pause. "Priya Rao called me on Tuesday," George said. "She said you were likely to make this call." Nadia sat with that for a moment. Tuesday was the day after the storm. Tuesday was the morning after she had stood at the fence with her hand on the repaired post and thought, "Yes, of course she did," Nadia said. "She is a very thorough person," George said. "She is," Nadia said. George told her that the reserve would require 8 weeks to arrange adequate cover, and that this was standard practice for medical staff transitions, and he expected her to understand and comply, which she did. He told her that her work at Chobe had been excellent, and that she had contributed meaningfully to the reserve's outcomes, and that he hoped the new position would suit her. George Nedlovu expressed these things in a tone that was professional and warm, without being effusive, and Nadia found that she appreciated him very much in that moment. "One more thing," George said. "Cale Drovist." She waited. "I have known him for 6 years," George said. "I have worked with his property several times. He is serious and he is fair, and he does the right thing by his animals and his people." A pause. "He is not a very easy man." "No," Nadia said, "he is not. But he is the kind of man," George said, "who has an empty post at his gate for specific reasons." Nadia looked at the window above her small desk. The morning was starting outside, and the reserve was waking up around her. "I noticed the post," she said. "I thought you might," George said. "All right. 8 weeks' notice, formal letter by Tuesday. I will arrange cover. Go and do good work." She thanked him. She put down the phone and sat for a moment. She had a full day at Chobe, morning rounds, a follow-up on the buffalo, 2 vaccine records to update, a site inspection with George in the late afternoon that she had scheduled 3 weeks ago and intended to keep. She would go to the compound in the evening. She would tell Cale that the call was made. She thought about what George had said, the right thing by his animals and his people. She thought about 8 days. She thought about a kitchen that was warm at 9:30 in the evening. She thought about Grace's list that had been ready 2 days before, Nadia said yes, and Leon's gloves that had appeared without ceremony on day 12, and Samuel, who had described the turn in the mopane tree in terms that were exactly useful and nothing more. A compound full of people who paid attention and said necessary things and did not make occasions of things that did not require occasions. She picked up her bag and went to work. The day at Chobe was full, and she was glad of it. The buffalo was improving, which was satisfying. The vaccine records were a puzzle that resolved neatly, which was also satisfying. The site inspection with George took longer than expected, because there was a section of the northern boundary that raised questions. George wanted properly answered before he would sign off on anything, and Nadia appreciated this. It was the right call. She left Chobe at 5:30 and drove to the compound. The evening was quiet when she arrived. The after-rain quality was still in the air, though fainter now, beginning to be replaced by the returning dust warmth. She fed Theo, who ate quickly, and then stood against her knee in the particular alert way he had developed recently, not the anxious clinging of the first days but something more considered. He was watching the adult enclosure while he pressed against her. He was paying attention to Ada. Priya came and stood beside Nadia. "He is ready," Priya said. "Another week and we try the first proper introduction." Nadia looked at Theo. "Does he know that?" "Yes," Priya said. "That is what that is." She nodded at the pup's posture. "He is watching Ada. He is deciding whether she is safe." "How does he know she is safe?" Nadia asked. Priya looked at Ada, who was lying in the far section of her enclosure, completely relaxed, one ear turned in the Theo's direction. "She is telling him," Priya said, "the same way she tells everything, by being exactly what she is." Nadia looked at the wolf, the long gray body, entirely at rest, the ear that was listening without making a show of it. She thought, "Yes, that is how you tell something." Fringal Kale appeared from the direction of the equipment yard. He came across to the wolf area and looked at Theo. "Priya says a week," he said. "Yes," Nadia said. "I called George this morning." He looked at her. 8 weeks' notice, she said, "which is standard, every formal letter by Tuesday." She looked at Theo. "So it is settled." Kale was quiet for a moment. She could feel him beside her, the same way she had felt him at the fence in the rain, present and specific. "Good," he said, the same word, the same tone, something uncertain becoming settled. She said, "I want to see the list Priya made." "Tonight," he said. "After dinner." She nodded. Theo made a small sound and she looked down and he was looking up at her, not anxious, just checking. She put her hand on the fence and he pressed his nose against it from the inside. She thought about a river that pulls sideways. She thought about 8 days of looking. She thought about a wooden post with no sign. She thought about how things become true, not in a single moment. In the accumulation of mornings, of turns in the mopane, of work done beside someone, of repairs that hold. She looked at Ada, lying in the evening light, being exactly what she is. Nadia took her hand off the fence. "Right," she said. "Let's go look at the list." Theo ran on a Tuesday. Priya had been preparing for it since the Monday introductions, which had gone better than anyone had allowed themselves to say out loud. Ada had approached the shared gate. Theo had not flinched. Ada had made a low sound that Priya described in her notes as a contact call, and then walked away, and Theo had watched her go with the focused attention of a student who has just received important information and is working out what it means. On Tuesday morning, Priya said, "Today," to Kale over breakfast, with the certainty of someone who had been watching this process for 11 years and knew the signs. Nadia had heard this from the door of the kitchen, where she had arrived at 6:15 because she had been at the compound since before sunrise. Her things moved in 3 days ago into the small room off the medical building that had been the previous medic's room and had been used for storage since, and now, after 2 days of Leon and Samuel carrying boxes and Grace directing the rearrangement with the precise authority she brought to all logistical matters, was hers. This had happened without occasion. That was how things happened here. Grace had put a coffee mug on Nadia's desk on the first morning, with Nadia's name written on it in permanent marker, block capitals, clean and deliberate. Nadia had looked at it and then looked at Grace, who had already turned back to her own work. "So it doesn't get borrowed," Grace said. Nadia had put the mug on the correct shelf. On the Tuesday morning that Priya said today, Nadia finished her coffee and went to the wolf area and found Theo doing what he had been doing for 3 days, standing near the shared gate watching the adult enclosure with the focused, patient attention of someone waiting for a thing they know is coming. Priya opened the shared gate at 9:15. Ada was in the center of the enclosure. She did not move toward the gate. She simply stopped moving in the way she had, completely. with the quality of having decided to be still. Theo stood at the gate for a long moment. Then he walked through. He went slowly, head down, body low, ears back in the posture of a young animal approaching something larger and certain. Ada waited. Two of the other wolves were in the far corner, watching. River, the young male, had moved to the side fence and was tracking Theo with his eyes. Theo was 8 meters from Ada when she turned her head and looked at him directly. He stopped. Ada made the low sound, the contact call. Theo took 3 more steps. Then he sat down in the grass about 2 meters from Ada and looked at her. Ada put her head back down. The 2 wolves in the far corner looked at each other. River lay down. And that was it. That was the moment. Not a ceremony. Not a declaration. Just a pup sitting in the grass 2 meters from the dominant female, and the female resting, and the pack absorbing it the way a body absorbs something it recognizes. Nadia stood at the ridge above the enclosure with Kale. She had not planned to stand here. She had been on the path to the medical building when Kale had appeared beside her and said, "Priya, opened the gate," and they had both gone to the ridge because that was the best view of the enclosure and that was where you went. She watched Theo in the grass. She watched Ada. She thought about Luna, who had been 2 years old and had been Ada's daughter and had gone into the river and had not come back. She thought about what Ada carried. She thought about what it cost a pack to lose something. She thought about Theo in her arms in the water, curled against her chest, trusting her without reason. She looked at Kale. He was very still, watching the enclosure. The expression on his face was the one she had been learning for 28 days now, the one that looked like controlled stillness from a distance, and from close up revealed itself as something quite different. It was the expression of someone who is feeling something large and has decided to feel it quietly. Something moved across his face. Not a dramatic thing. A quiet thing. She took his hand. Not tenderly, not tentatively. The way you hold something you have decided belongs there. She wrapped her fingers around his and held on. He did not look at her. He looked at the enclosure, but his hand closed around hers in the way of something that has found a place and settled into it. They stood on the ridge and watched Theo sit in the grass near Ada, and the morning light came in low and gold, the way it always did here, and the pack moved around the pup with the easy inclusion of things that have simply decided. Nadia did not say anything. Neither did Kale. There was nothing to say that the moment was not already saying. Below them, Theo lifted his head and looked toward the ridge, toward her. For a moment he was looking directly at her. Then Ada made a sound and Theo turned back, and that was that. He did not need her to be the safe thing. Ada was the safe thing now. The pack was the safe thing. She felt Kale's hand tighten around hers. She understood. Something you have been holding on to, held well and with care, and then set down in the right place. And the feeling is not loss, it is what the other side of love is when it works. The part where you let the thing become what it is. They stood there for a while. Then Priya's voice came from below. "Nadia, Ada's morning check." She looked at Kale. "Go," he said, not letting go of her hand, then letting go. She went down from the ridge. She did her work. She checked Ada and made her notes and helped Priya with the afternoon preparations and reviewed the week's records that she was now responsible for keeping. She had a system for the records already, a modification of the system she had used at Chobe, and Priya had looked at it and said, "That is better than what we had," which from Priya was significant. In the late afternoon, she sat on the step of the medical building with her notes and watched the enclosure from a distance. Theo was in the middle of the pack now, not at the edge. Ada had gotten up and moved once across the enclosure, and Theo had followed at a small distance, and then stopped when Ada stopped. Learning. Grace came and sat beside her on the step. She had a cup of tea. She handed Nadia half a biscuit. "Leon made them," Grace said. "They are better than they look." They were, in fact, very good. "When did Leon start baking?" Nadia asked. "He has always baked," Grace said. "He just did not do it in front of anyone for the first 2 years." She sipped her tea. "People here take time to show things." Nadia looked at her. For Grace looked at the enclosure. Nadia thought about 8 days of looking and a gate with no sign, and a list prepared 2 days before the answer was given. She thought about coffee at 6:40 in the morning handed over without being asked for. She thought about a hand on a ridge above an enclosure that held on and then let go. "Yes," Nadia said, "I have noticed." Grace finished her tea. "Good," she said. She stood up and went back inside. Nadia sat on the step with the rest of her biscuit and watched the pack until the light went. A week passed, then another, and another. The compound settled into itself with Nadia in it, the way compounds do when a new person has stopped being new. She had a rhythm. Morning check at 6, feed prep, the round of the wolf enclosures that Priya did with her every morning, and that took 45 minutes to do correctly, the maintenance log, the medical records, the coordination with George Andelovu's team at Chobe for the shared cases that came up from time to time. She was busy, she was useful, she was good at the work. Theo was fully with the pack by the end of the second week. He slept in the adult enclosure now, tucked in the general pile of wolves that gathered near the shelter on cool nights. He ate with the pack, competed mildly for the best pieces, lost to everyone but River, who let him win twice, which Priya observed and noted, and said nothing about except to write it in the log. He still came to Nadia when she entered the enclosure, not the desperate press of the early days, but a greeting, a nose to her hand, a moment of contact, and then off back to whatever he had been doing. Priya said this was healthy attachment. He knew who had found him. He also knew where he belonged now. Nadia understood this. There was a conversation between her and Kale that had not happened yet, and that was going to happen. She knew this the way she knew most things, not because anyone had said it, but because she was paying attention. She thought about Grace's voice in the equipment shed. I am telling you because she will go. She thought about the ridge in the hand and the letting go. She thought about the post with no sign. Kale Drovst was a man of specific habits. He was at his desk before anyone else in the morning. He did the last check of the property every night after dinner. He ate with his staff every evening. He said what needed to be said about work, and not much more in groups. And in the evenings after the others had gone to their rooms, he sat at the kitchen table with whatever he was reading or reviewing. And Nadia, who had taken to sitting at the same table with her own end-of-day notes, had begun to understand the particular quality of his company. It was company that did not require filling. She had not had that in a long time. She thought she might have been looking for it for a long time without naming it. On the night of the 5th week she was at the kitchen table, and Kale was across from her, and the compound was quiet, and Theo was in his enclosure, and Ada was sleeping, and the night sounds of the bush were doing what they did, and Kale put down what he was reading and looked at her. She looked up. You are staying, he said. She put her pen down. Yes. Not only because of the position, he said. It was not a question. It was the kind of statement that careful men make when they have thought about how to say something for a long time and have chosen the most exact version. No, she said, not only because of the position. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, good. She picked up her pen. They sat at the table, and outside the wolves were quiet, and inside the kitchen was warm, and the night moved around the compound in the way that nights do when they know where they are. Nothing was declared. Nothing was announced. But something settled. The way a repair settles, the way a post driven properly into the ground settles, quiet and sure, and there to be tested in the next storm. Nadia wrote her notes. Kale read his papers. The compound held them both. 6 months. 6 months since the river, since the cold brown water, and the small gray weight of a pup against her chest, and a man on the bank who said 2 words and watched her come ashore. 6 months since the mopane tree and the kitchen table and the storm and the ridge. 6 months of mornings at 6 and coffee at 6:40 and feed prep and wolf rounds and records that were now thoroughly hers. Theo was 5 months past his introduction to the pack. He was large now, or beginning to be, the ungainly largeness of a young wolf whose legs had grown faster than his coordination had caught up. He loped rather than ran. He tripped over River twice a week, and took the indignity with the equanimity of an animal that had other things to think about. Ada had begun to include him in the morning movement patterns of the pack, which meant he followed her at a slight distance across the enclosure, in a way that Priya said was the wolf equivalent of apprenticeship. He still greeted Nadia every morning. Nose to hand, brief, certain, then back to his business. She loved him. She would not have used that word 3 months ago. She used it now without examining it, the way you use words when they stop being categories and start being just true. She used it for the compound, for the work, for Priya's precision and Grace's dry remarks, and Leon's biscuits, and Samuel's useful instructions for the morning light, after rain, and the post at the gate, and the particular quality of the kitchen at 9:30 in the evening. She did not use it yet for Kale, not out loud, not directly. But the word was there, waiting. The way words wait when you know they are the right ones and you are just finding the moment. She found the moment, as it turned out, on a very ordinary morning. She was in the feed room doing prep and he came in to check something in the supply log, which was on the wall near the window, and she was on the other side of the room, and he found what he was looking for, and made a note, and then did not leave. She looked up. He was looking at her with the expression she had been learning for 6 months, The one that was not complicated, it only looked complicated from the outside. From the inside, once you understood it, it was the most straightforward thing she had ever seen. It was the look of a man who has found the thing he was searching for, and is still quietly astonished that it arrived the way it did. Out of a river, dripping, bleeding, with a wolf pup clutched to her chest. She put down the knife. She crossed the feed room. She stood in front of him and looked at him, and he looked at her, and the morning was going on around the compound, the radio crackling somewhere, Ada moving in her enclosure, the light coming in through the feed room window at the angle it came in at this time of year. She said, "I am not going anywhere." He put his hand against the side of her face, just that, steady and specific. "I know," he said. "I have known since the river." She had known too. Not since the river exactly, since the fence in the rain, maybe, since the ridge, since 100 mornings with coffee handed over without asking. She had known the way you know a thing you cannot make simpler, you just keep discovering it's still true. She leaned into his hand. Outside, Theo made the sound he made when the pack started its morning movement, the alert sound, the I am paying attention sound, the sound that meant he was exactly where he was supposed to be. She thought about people who said she had been held here, kept here. She thought about what she would tell them. She was not kept. She was recognized. There is a difference. She had dived into the river for a pup she had never seen, and she had come out on the other side, and a man on the bank had looked at her the way people look at things they have been searching for, and she had looked back and understood something that took 6 months to say out loud. You cannot keep a person like Nadia Cole. You cannot hold her with requirements or arrangements or positions on paper. You can only be the kind of place worth staying in, the kind of work worth doing, the kind of presence that does not require filling. Kyle Drost had not held her. He had simply been exactly what he was, and she had stayed. The compound held the morning around them. Theo ran with the pack below. The light moved across the feed room floor in the slow, patient way of light that has nowhere to be except exactly here. Nadia Cole was 27 years old and 8 months and 23 days. She was exactly where she was supposed to be. She had known that since the river. She just needed 6 months to finish saying it.